The Honourable Randy Boissonnault was first elected to the House of Commons in 2015 and was re-elected in 2021, representing Edmonton Centre. And I can tell you, in between there, that the last election was a squeaker. So good to see you back in the seat, Minister Boissonnault. In 2016, Minister Boissonnault became Canada's special advisor to the Prime Minister on LGBTQ2 issues, working with organizations across the country to promote equality for the LGBTQ2 community, protect the rights of its members, and address discrimination against them. He continues to fight for a more inclusive society and tackle discrimination as a co-founder of the Global Equality Caucus. In 2021, Minister Boissonnault became the Minister of Tourism and Associate Minister of Finance. Minister Boissonnault holds degrees from the University of Alberta's Campus St. Jean and Oxford University, where he studied as a Rhodes Scholar. Everyone, please welcome Minister Randy Boissonnault.
Well, thanks very much, Curry, and it's great to see you. I think you and I first met back when I had hair, which is probably as long as I've known Karen Witchuk and some other people on this call. Certainly Sarah. I mean, there's former clients, there's friends, there's colleagues from the business and leadership community here in Edmonton. So look, it's a great pleasure to be here, and I'm as are many of you here on Treaty 6 territory today, the land of the Cree, the Saulteaux, the Blackfoot, the Métis, the Dene, and the Nakota Sioux. And with the team, we made a pitch to residents of Edmonton Centre that if they would send me to represent them back in Ottawa, that we could have a strong progressive voice from Edmonton back in the federal government, and that we would bring those concerns to Ottawa. And as it's turned out, we now have that pipeline rebuilt between Edmonton and Alberta to Ottawa at the cabinet table. And so it is a great honor to serve as Minister of Tourism and Associate Minister of Finance. And I'm really looking forward to getting into the issues with everyone today. Pour moi, c'est un grand plaisir d'être ici pour la première fois en adressant la communauté des affaires ici à Edmonton en tant que ministre du Tourisme et ministre associé aux Finances et comme ministre pour l'Alberta. And I think, Korean, that's my third hat, and it's the most important as Minister for Alberta. So 2 years in March since the global pandemic started, and as we know, just walking downtown in Edmonton and in our own businesses, business leaders have had to make some really stark choices, and so have governments. And the last 2 years have been some of the toughest that I and that you have ever had to live through. Your operations were knocked off because of Alpha, because of Delta. And now, just when we thought we were coming out of it, we've got Omicron to deal with. Canadians have had to work from home, and all the time that demand for PPE soared, and we've seen the challenges with supply chains. We'll get into that as well. And look, to be blunt, it's been exhausting, and for some businesses, devastating. Many have had to leave staff go, and some have had to close their doors. And Albertan and Canadian small businesses have shown incredible resilience through the pandemic. So I thank each and every one of you for doing what you had to do to keep your doors open, for keeping employees safe. And I can say that the federal government has had our back since, to your point, Curry, and I was on an involuntary sabbatical during that time. But 9 out of $10 that supported Albertans during the pandemic came from the federal government. And we can get into that. And we made a choice to deliver unprecedented support because it was an unprecedented time, and we knew that it was the right thing to do. And the government did that because it was an investment that we hoped would pay off. And I'll give you an example from the doors, and I'll never forget this. A younger volunteer was in one of our neighborhoods that, look, it may not have been the friendliest neighborhood over time, but there was a woman on the doorstep, and she said, "Come over here and have a sit with me on the porch, son." And you're never really sure how that's going to go, right? But he went up and sat down, and she said, "Look at the 3 houses to the left of me. Look at the 3 houses to the right of me, and look at my own. All 7 houses would have been lost without the federal government supports." And so we haven't done it before, but we're voting for your guy as a block because the government saved our block. And I have heard this from companies like Kunitz Shoes, from Duchess, dozens of other operators, Tiramisu and others that have said without those supports, without the wage supports, the rent supports, that they simply would have had to close their doors. And that deep economic scarring is we didn't want to see that. We wanted to avoid that. And that's exactly what we did. And so that support continues to this day. And just this past December, as Associate Minister of Finance, I put legislation on the floor of the House that is going to continue to sustain tourism businesses and hardest hit businesses all the way to May 22. And in that legislation, we extended the Canada Recovery Hiring Program, we expanded the local lockdown program, and created the Canada Worker Lockdown Benefit. And for my tourism hat, we made sure that we had the Tourism and Hospitality Recovery Program and the Hardest Hit Business Recovery Program. So, look, there was opposition, there was pushback. People said that enough was enough, but I can tell you that we would have lost tens of thousands of businesses had we not done that. And I'm very interested to hear your feedback. And my message is that we'll always be there for Canadians to give them the support they need as we finish the fight against COVID. And that's what we're seeing even now as we get through Omicron and hope to see the numbers coming down soon. Before we get to questions, Kurian, let me just put my Associate Minister of Finance hat on and set the economic table, because I know I'm assuming there's going to be some questions on that in the upcoming budget. If we go back 2 years, the government faced a prospect of the greatest depression, the greatest recession since the Great Depression, and a once-in-a-century health crisis. And the government knew that to keep people safe, we needed to support businesses and people in an unprecedented way to avoid deep economic scarring. And we also know that people wouldn't be able to go to work, and that we were asking businesses to close their doors to keep people safe. So the federal government took on hundreds of billions of dollars of debt so that Edmontonians and Canadians and provinces and territories didn't have to. Now, fortunately, we had the best balance sheet in the G7 to be able to do that at the beginning of the pandemic. And so there was some fiscal room to make that investment in Canadians. And 2 years later, we can see that the plan has indeed worked. How do I know that? Well, a few things for you to know. 108% of jobs lost since the start of the pandemic are now back. Annualized GDP growth this fall of 5.4%. The lowest debt to GDP ratio now in the G7, a AAA credit rating. And here's a stat that I found fascinating that came out in the economic fall update, fiscal update, which is the size of the Canadian economy right now is $2.5 trillion, which is exactly where finance predicted it to be in our 2018 budget. So think about that. The economy is back to where we predicted it would be before the pandemic. And the governor of the Bank of Canada, and we can certainly talk about that, this week essentially said that we're at full employment. And there's a message there. They sent a clear message that they're holding the rates now, but to stay tuned. And we know there's more to this picture here in Alberta. Pre-COVID, the oil and gas price drop, the world demanding cleaner and greener energy, and the tourism sector now devastated by closed borders.
Alberta has a voice now at the cabinet table. What does it mean for Alberta to have a voice at the cabinet table? And you are that voice.
It's about telling our story. It's about being in the rooms. It's about advocating for our issues and for the 4.5 million people who make this place home. It's about telling the story of our cities, but also rural Albertans, telling the story about Indigenous Albertans, and making sure that my colleagues don't guess anymore. And with me here and George Hall in Calgary, we've got a Team Alberta approach. George is the chair of the Prairies and North Caucus. And so that means we hear his voice every week at National Caucus. And then, look, I sit on the Intergovernmental Committee. I sit on the big committee that splits cabinet in two to look at all of the big issues that come to us before we get to cabinet. And I sit on Treasury Board. And with my two hats of tourism and finance, we're able to advocate for some of the heavy lifting that we're going to have to do out here. There's no accident that the Prime Minister asked me to do tourism plus Associate Minister of Finance, because he sees how much that economic development growth is an important piece. And Kurian, this is a stat that I have to admit I learned after being Minister of Tourism. I knew that tourism was our number 3 economic driver. I did not know that tourism is our number 2 export. So colleagues, tourism is booked on our books as an export. Makes sense, right? Stuff's coming into our province or to our country. It's booked as an export. I didn't know that after oil and gas, tourism is number 2 export. So if you just think about how important that is to Alberta, the fact that we have Jasper, we have Banff, the top 2 national parks in the national system, but also the power of our cities to bring people here and our communities to bring people here is a really important thing. And my job every day is to take an Alberta lens. And so I'm going to make this offer to you now. One of the things that I noticed when I was not in office, but also when I was in office, is Alberta businesses, we just tend to get stuff done on our own. We don't think about Ottawa. We don't think about necessarily the provincial government. We just get stuff done. But quite frankly, there are programs that other businesses and other parts of the country get to take advantage of. And I want us to be able to do that. So my offer to you is that I've got an office on the Hill in Ottawa. If you're planning to make a trip to Ottawa, let me in my office know. That's why I put my email in the chat. You can stage from my office on the 5th floor of Confederation. My team will help you set up the meetings you need to set up in government. We got to be loud and we got to be proud that we're Albertans, and that's my job as Minister for Alberta.
It's been 2 years now since COVID hit, and it's barreled through absolutely every aspect of society, culturally, economically, family-wise, all these different types of things. Hopefully the carnage is done. Maybe Omicron is the last little wave. Probably not. Maybe we'll settle into a little kind of flu type of thing. Manage it like the flu. Mind you, that's been going on since 1918. So that could be a long-term thing as well. What are the government's top priorities now to get Canada moving again?
It's a great question, Kurian, and I'm going to put on my tourism hat for a minute, and then I'll go to the finance hat and the Alberta hat. I have said clearly that safety first and then travel. Safety first and then travel. And I see Richard Wong and, you and I have talked about bringing more tourists and more visitors here and the importance to the hotel sector of the big events and getting people back and being able to book those events. So I'm the minister that pushes the ministers to say, okay, let's get things opened up again and let's get on with it. We can't overwhelm our health system. We know that. That's a governor in this. And the number one pathway to getting us to a full open economy is high vaccination rates. And then you will have heard some of the really smart physicians and the epidemiologists talk about vaccination plus. So what's the plus in vaccination plus? Well, it's basic health. It's taking care of ourselves. It's making sure we haven't been in our basement watching Netflix for a month. It's eating well, but it's also making sure that we've got the HEPA filters in our businesses, that we're taking care of each other, that we observe those regular health guidelines, and that we lean on that. And that's why, look, we've invested $500 billion on Canadians already. And the December amount is 7.4 billion plus another 4.5 that we gave ourselves the ability to use. And guess what? We're going to need it because we're providing 140 million rapid tests to provinces and territories. We have funded all of the pediatric vaccines. We're also funding the antiviral drugs so that if people do get Omicron or another variant, they're able to get that done. And Curry, and the other thing that we're going to have to look at as a government and as Canadians is making sure that we're helping the world to get vaccinated so that these other variants don't get incubated in other parts of the world and then affect us. And I do agree with you. We're going to have to learn how to live with the virus. But again, we got to do that in a way that doesn't overwhelm our health system. So for me, in my job as Alberta Minister and Finance Minister is to make sure that we have things in the budget, but also things in our program that really stimulate economic growth and economic diversification. And in that case, I would encourage everybody on this call, if you haven't taken a look at the program yet, look at the Canada Digital Adoption Program. It's $1.4 billion coming out of Innovation, Science and Economic Development. And Prairies Canada, which used to be Western Diversification, can help you with this. But it literally will put a millennial to work in your business. They'll help you do a digital audit, and they'll help you figure out how you can automate some processes and practices, digitize your offering, and make sure that you're ready for when we get through this wave of the pandemic and we can more fully open. So I am very much focused as budget consultations are around the corner, Korean, on getting the best and brightest ideas from our region and our province on how do we lean in and really have an economic focused budget.
So it's been 2 years now since COVID hit. 2 years. I remember my doctor next door to me saying, how long will we be in this now? And he told me 6 months. And here we are 2 years later. And in that 2 years, we've had to spend massively to support the economy. Mm-hmm. And so we're all familiar with acronyms like CUES and CERB and those kinds of things. My question is, what is the government's plan now to regain a stable footing, financial footing in a post-COVID world, regardless of the necessity for all that spending and perhaps a continued necessity to spend a little bit more?
I really appreciate that question, Curry, and I can say that fiscal stewardship prior to the pandemic led us to have the lowest debt to GDP ratio before the pandemic hit. And what does that mean? It literally means that we had room to invest in Canadians, and you can look at the numbers as well as I can. We spent 20% of our fiscal capacity, $500 billion, to get Canadians and provinces through the worst of the pandemic. And so I can say also that coming through that, we still have the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the G7. What does that mean? It means our colleague nations, our partner nations, spent even more, invested more in their COVID response, in some respects because of higher populations. But I can say that our fiscal track is to get our spending, our deficit spending, to within 1% of GDP. And it's no accident why Chrystia Freeland, Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister, put in the 21 budget $30 billion for childcare. And I'm very happy to see the agreement that we negotiated with the provincial government here, because we see childcare and the savings that this is going to mean to Albertan parents, and also the ability, and let's be frank, mostly for women, moms, to get back to the workforce, to be a permanent GDP increase of somewhere between 1.5%, maybe as high as 2%. And the proof in the pudding is the experience from Quebec. So that's an important economic driver. But so are investments in infrastructure. And colleagues, I can say to you that I can't wait to the day when we can see, our cities with fully developed LRT and metro systems, that we are able to connect our cities in clean and green ways, and that we're able, and I see Tom here and Myron and others, and that we're able to continue to green air traffic and get Canadians traveling to our city and our province, but also to get those borders open so that more people can come. So the fiscal track is very clear. It's to get that spending to within 1% of GDP by 2026. And I do want any creative ideas for how we can make sure that we're telling the Alberta story in the context of the 2022 budget.
From an Edmonton perspective, where do you see the opportunities for growth in that post-COVID world, and what role would the federal government play in catalyzing that?
Curry, and there's just so much that's going on in our city that's outstanding. And I do think that we have to, and I see Tom Ruth's comment here about how do we hunt like a pack. I think we have to really lean in as a region, as a city, and as a province and tell our story. And that's why I'm inviting, all of you to come to Ottawa and help me tell our story. Let's talk about hydrogen and how Edmonton can lead the country in hydrogen. We've got the supply. We've got emerging hydrogen hubs that will be able to really create the demand, prove the demand curve. Yes, I'm looking at you, Edmonton Airport. Yes, I'm looking at Alberta Heartland. I know where you are, and I want you all to succeed. I also think that we got to think of us. I know that Calgary always is assumed in the rest of the country as the energy sector, but let's stake out our claim in the energy sector and our role in the energy sector. And as we head through this evolution of energy, what is our role to make sure that we get to the greenest barrel of oil, that we get to the greenest, the greenest unit of natural gas, that we're bringing on all of the other forms of net zero energy, and that we have an adult conversation about nuclear. So why do I go there? Because the tech sector is going to be critical for us. The artificial intelligence, machine language. We've got Catherine Warren now at Innovate Edmonton. The virology sector, building on the work of a Nobel laureate, Dr. Houghton, and the ability to actually produce small molecule pharmaceuticals right here in our own backyard is a story that I want your help to tell my colleagues to. We don't even have to go too far. Go to the airport, go to the Heartland, go to Leduc and see what's happening with agri-food and agribusiness, and the ability of us to export. And I got to say, your leadership as a sector and as a region in diversifying cargo in our region is also going to help us compete with the Americans, and it's going to put us on a fantastic track to have a very unique region in supply chain management in Canada, and I can't say enough about that. Now, all of those things that I've mentioned have access to and have either been funded by the Strategic Innovation Fund or Prairies Canada or the National Transportation Corridor Fund or any range of programs that we have, including the partnerships that we have at NAIT, the University of Alberta, and our wonderful post-secondary ecosystem. So here's the other thing I need to say to everybody on the call, Corinne. If you have an ask into the federal government, please tell me about it. And if you put an ask into the federal government and it doesn't go anywhere, I also want to know about that, because my job as your MP and as Minister for Alberta is to track these projects, to take them to my colleagues, to get them into the department, and quite frankly, to make sure that Alberta gets its fair share and that Edmonton gets our fair share, because this is where the growth is happening in the country, friends. This is where we're going to be able to build the kind of country that we want to see for the long term. And the 5th largest city and the 4th largest city to the south have to go and stake our claims in Ottawa, and that's what I want to be able to do.
The minister has to get back to caucus, but I want to thank Randy for coming out and joining us. He certainly knew a ton of people on this call, and I know a lot of people know him. So we really appreciate the time, and we're the number one, right? We're the first business opportunity to get in front of all these business people that you've had since you've become minister. So we really appreciate that as well.